Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohon, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety podcast. I'm Jim Seibert, and I am joined by and with Mike Bohon, Kenny Ray, and Mr. Barry Harrison. Really thankful to be with you all today, talking about the dangers of heat exposure. This is episode 60. I want to start this podcast off, gents, if I may, talking about the proposed heat injury and illness prevention regulation that OSHA set out in July of 2024, but they've been working on it for a long time. This is nothing new. If you're a safety professional and you've been watching and listening, this has been coming for goodness. I've been hearing about it for at least 10 years, and it finally got put into written form and submitted, but not put fully into effect. And this is not a political podcast, but to understand where we may be sitting, we're just going to talk briefly about administrations, and I'm not going to call them by name. We're going to go current administration and previous administration. So naturally, I give you that 10-year window that I've been hearing about it. So that spans a couple administrations. The fact that this was put out in July of 2024 and submitted up and not passed or accepted under the previous administration, now we're in a different administration, and the likelihood of new, more stringent regulations being passed and actually put into law, it is less likely under this administration than it was on the previous. So I say that not to say, well, we can ignore it. In no shape or fashion or form am I saying that this is a topic or this is something that, since it is not a law, that we shouldn't give it at least our full attention. And it's a part of everyday life for many of us. And as employers and as employees, there is such a thing as the general duty clause. And that general duty, what is that? That is us as an employer, as a company, having the duty to provide a workplace that are free of recognized hazards. So, all that being said, the heat injury and illness prevention plan underneath OSHA, even though it may be on pause, we've got a lot of great information on how to address an identified risk or hazard in our workplace. Just because federal OSHA does not have the law in place, let's go ahead and call it out. There's 22 state plan OSHA states out there. By that, I mean they have their own state OSHA plans, which means they execute a plan. The base level, we can never drop below federal, and that's within each state plan. They cannot drop below the federal OSHA plans, but they can go above and beyond. There's 22 states that have their own plan that goes above and beyond the OSHA federal plans, federal regulations. Of those 22, 5 currently have heat injury and illness prevention programs. That's Washington, Minnesota, California, Oregon, Colorado. Not a big surprise there, right? That those 5 would have them. The OSHA's heat regulation, even though it's not fully enacted, all right, it aims to protect workers from heat-related illnesses in both outdoor and indoor work environments. This plan that they proposed, it's got initial heat triggers and then high heat triggers. It's got development of a HIP is what those in the industry were calling it, the Heat Injury and Illness Prevention Plan. It's got acclimatization rules, training rules, additional items to be added to your emergency response plan that specialize and focus around heat, injury, and illness. There's monitoring and record keeping for given time periods, given days. There's mentions of buddy systems where when you have two, you can help identify the signs of heat exposures in others when there's two people there, and rules about rest breaks, providing cool drinking water, shading cool down areas. So there is some background of where we're at today, and that's in the OSHA regulatory world. But this has been going on for those of us that have worked for companies. Maybe we've been employers. We have recognized heat and cold as risks and exposures and potential injury makers. So, in what way can we take our knowledge and directly apply it to the trucking industry?
Well, Jim, I think you brought up some points there that I wanted to come back around and maybe get some insight from some of the other guys, because I know Barry, Kenny, you guys have been at motor carriers, but obviously what we're talking about here is preventing the heat illnesses, and I think the trucking companies that are listening to us today face some unique challenges as opposed to maybe some other types of industry, because some of their workers, the majority of their workers, are going to be in trucks. They're going to be out there on the road where they may be facing some of these issues that come along with heat illness. But I guess my question to you guys is, where do these companies start? Is it assessment of the hazards? Is that where we want to start with, is saying, as a trucking company out there, we know there's heat related illnesses that can come about. How do we look at our companies that we operate on a daily basis and see where the points are where our employees, our drivers, maybe our mechanics, the folks working the shop, the warehouses, things like that, where are our employees in danger? And I don't know, and I'm truly asking you guys, is assessment, is that the place we start? Because I know there's a lot of materials out there. There's training materials, there's policies we can put in place, things like that. But I think for me, in my mind, it's understanding where we're at risk the most and doing that assessment and figuring out, okay, well, when our drivers are on the road, where are they in danger of heat related illnesses? Am I thinking right to you guys?
Absolutely. And Mike, I think it's important for these safety directors and owners of company to be intentional about thinking specifically about their employees' work environment, whether that's a truck driver, a mechanic, somebody working in the warehouse, a guy that fixes flats out on the yard, whatever. Y'all know I'm in Texas, and our summers down here are brutal. I mean, they are just brutal. But even within a state that has really, really tough summers, and I know two of our coworkers on here from Oklahoma, and they have brutal summers as well. But think about this. Let me make a Texas example. Let's say you have a trucking company that has a driver in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and they're going to drive down Interstate 35 to San Antonio, or they're going to drive down Interstate 45 to Houston. Even though they're going to be in that brutal Texas heat in the middle of August, and the further south they get in my state, the higher the humidity, let's say that truck breaks down, that tractor lays down on them on the side of the road, and they're stranded out here on the side of the road. If they're between Dallas and San Antonio, or they're between Dallas and Houston, they're no more than a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles maybe from an exit somewhere on the interstate that's going to have access to a gas station, a convenience store, a fast food place. They can get in and out of the heat. They can make a phone call. They can get something to eat or drink. When I mention about the specificity of these safety directors and these owners of trucking companies thinking about where their employees work, particularly these companies that are OTR, over the road, I want them to think about long term. Where are my drivers going to be at any point in that trip? And where I'm going with this is imagine if you've got motor carriers that run to the West Coast. So whether they're leaving Texas on Interstate 10 or they're leaving Oklahoma and Texas on Interstate 40, or whichever one of the major interstates goes from any part of the central part of our country to the West Coast, particularly to Southern California, and they're going across Arizona, they're going across Nevada. From the time they get west of Midland, Texas, all the way till they get into Southern California, they literally are in an environment during the summer that is hostile to human beings. It's just not a good place to be. Imagine if they're going across Arizona, they're going across Nevada, and it's in the middle of the day. And we're not talking about temperatures that are quote unquote just in triple digits. We're talking about temperatures that are dangerous triple digits, 110, 115, close to 120 degrees in some parts, and very, very low single digit humidity. And you take those two factors, that kind of heat and that low humidity, and if somebody doesn't have access to water, that can dehydrate a person and get them in a dangerous situation in a very, very, very short period of time. So, and I'm not trying to be dramatic with that, but the point I'm trying to make is these safety directors and owners of companies think about, how do I implement a heat prevention plan for my employees? They've got to think bigger than the terminal. They've got to think bigger than saying, well, I'm a Dallas-Fort Worth or I'm an Oklahoma City trucking company, so what are the conditions in Dallas-Fort Worth and Oklahoma City? They've got to think, where do I send my drivers? Another example, let's say you're a tanker outfit and you haul Class 8 corrosives, hazmat, and you're sending drivers to South Louisiana to a port to unload acid, a load of acid. They're going to have to pump it off. It's going to take them 3.5 hours to offload a load of acid. The driver has to be in attendance by hazmat regulations, and he or she's going to basically be encapsulated in a rubber suit to protect themselves in case that hose busts or they have a spill of that Class 8 corrosive. So imagine putting somebody in South Louisiana and the heat and the humidity they have, and they're having to wear all of their PPE at the same time. And the whole reason I bring up both of those examples is simply for the safety directors and owners of trucking companies to think about, where is my employee's actual work environment? Think bigger than the terminal. Now, while we're talking about terminals, let's say they have their own shop. They need to think about those mechanics out there working in that shop. I've been, and Mike, I know you and Barry have encountered the same, and Jim, with your OSHA business, I know y'all have encountered this. We go to a terminal where the person we're contacting has a nice air-conditioned office, and we're sitting in there talking to them, and they say, hey, you want to walk through the shop? Sure, let's go out the shop. And you open that door from the office portion of the building, and you step out into that shop, and the heat just hits you. It almost knocks you down. And you do a walkthrough through the shop. And then when you get back to the office, you say, man, thank you for air conditioning. It's so nice to be back in here. And then I want you to pause and think, those mechanics are out there for 8, 9, 10, maybe 12 hours a day in something that you walk through in 5 minutes and were miserable. So even your employees that are right there on site, you've got to think through, what is their actual work environment? And the identical same principle holds for warehouse employees that may be driving propane-powered forklifts, and they're creating heat within the confines of that warehouse. And the whole point of all of my contribution to this particular topic is, for safety directors, owners of trucking companies, terminal managers, whoever might be listening to us, think outside your immediate work location and just ask yourself, in fact, get a piece of paper or a whiteboard and jot down, where do my drivers operate? What's the most hostile environment my drivers could be in? Where do my mechanics work? If I have to send a service truck out on the side of the road to change a tire, what is my tire changer going to be doing? I just want them to think about those sorts of things.
You made some really good points there, and I was just jotting down some bullets because I thought it was good stuff to add to my toolbox talks for later. But you kind of highlighted job assessments, and you made a comparison of, we look at maybe the atmosphere that we're working in right now, and if we're a safety director or we're a dispatcher or a boss, I'm sitting in a pretty cool office right now before I hit the road to get out there, but the comfort level of me, I don't necessarily think it all the time. Hey, my truckers are sitting in air conditioning right now. So that work environment, that job assessment, I think is kind of critical aspect of what you said there. And the work environment changes for our drivers way more than it may change for that dispatcher or that director at the company. So taking that into mind, um, does their work environment take them out of their vehicle? And what if it is mandated that they got to exit their vehicle? They got to break down. They couldn't get their windows down. The time of the year we're taking these trips, planning and effective planning of trips through some of those austere environments that you'd mentioned where, and we hit triple digits. For those of you that have been there, I'll tell you right now, my time in the desert, I can't escape the heat even in the shade when you're in the desert. So, yeah, your truck breaks down, windows up or windows down, you just can't get away from it. And so the planning of those trips and discussing primary, secondary, tertiary actions upon breakdown and communications. I mean, Kenny, just today, this is a pretty good example. You can't pull over on the side of the road to do a podcast just anywhere. Communication, sometimes we just don't get the good connectivity. So, gentlemen, any of you guys have customers that are rocking and rolling across multiple states, going through some of these? I mean, South Texas, Texas, Oklahoma, but what about going through the western part of the United States where you cross them Rockies?
Yeah, Jim, it all comes kind of full circle for you because blowouts are bound to happen, especially as that temperature rises. And it comes to mind, several times as we're going across New Mexico into Southern California, like you guys have mentioned, that heat gets up there 115 to 120 sometimes. And, fortunately, the company I was with, we were able to deliver into some military installations. And specifically, when I think about it, our military operations were running some training programs out in the desert. And I remember specifically talking to my drivers when they would pull up and be waiting to be unloaded, and it'd be 110 to 120 degrees out there. And it's kind of a different feel when you get that call as a safety director, because your mind goes into, okay, what can I tell this guy to prepare? And the first question I would always ask, do you have water? Do you have sufficient supplies to stay hydrated? And hopefully they hydrated the day before. And you hit it on the head, though. It's preparing to go into those areas before you do, because like I said when I first kicked this off, it was blowouts happen, and what we do to prepare before that happens, because unfortunately in the desert there's not always great cell reception, and just encouraging those people to be as prepared as possible. And then the adverse of it when we're in the desert is it's going to get really cold at night. So you've got these kind of two extremes at times, and making sure that we've got a blanket, a sleeping bag, something like that when the worst case scenario happens and we are broke down on the side of the road. I was always quick to really monitor those trucks to see if they were moving or not. And if not, we were trying to call. If we couldn't get cell reception, we may just call a Love's, TA, whatever it was, to get somebody out there to make sure that our guy was okay, or our gal was okay. On that kind of front of blown tires, as heat rises, I encourage everyone to consider, if you can, have your driver slow down a little bit to hopefully save those tires a little bit. Make sure that your loads are distributed properly. And it seemed like it never failed. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but when we were loading or reloading in the desert areas, it always had to be tarped for some reason. And so that was another aspect of it. It was, man, you're going to be out there on that thing in the heat, in the sun. If you can find a shaded area, let's try to find that and maybe get 5 degrees lower on the temperature. But, you know, we need to take some breaks if we can. If you don't have cold water, if you can't, you know, just take a short break and hop in that cab for 5 or 10 minutes. Because the last thing I want is you falling out. And then especially the last thing I want is you falling out when you're standing on that trailer trying to get that thing tied down correctly and secured. So, you know, it's, again, so much of it is assessing. A lot of times we're not in the moment. And to tell a little story on myself, it's been a couple months ago, and it wasn't even the summer months. And I went down to Houston for some training, and I was there with Kenny actually. And boys, let me tell you, while the weather is similar, it's different. It is a different kind of humidity when you get down there in Houston. And we had a lot of freight that came out of Houston that had to be out of the ports, and it had to be tarped. So again, it was talking those people through it, especially if you've got people that aren't extremely comfortable and are newer with tarping. It's just making sure that they slow down and take their time. And if they've got to take a couple breaks, to be honest, that was a fight I was always willing to fight with operations. This guy is going to take a little bit longer to tarp this than what normally would, but it's also 105 degrees with a 95% humidity. So we've got to take those things into consideration. We're all humans. And, you know, everybody reacts differently to heat. I know that as I get a little older, when I was 22, 23 years old, I could handle the heat a lot better than I can now. And, you know, that comes a little bit from being soft and sitting in an office chair for as long as I have. But we just have to always remember to give a little grace and be understanding that, you know, everybody's going to react a little bit differently. Everybody needs to take a little bit of time to make sure that they're not getting too hot, and just so that we can get them back safely. Because remember, fatigue comes with heat, and the last thing we want is somebody, you know, that's on that kind of line of very hot, very fatigued, having to drive 10, 11 hours.
That's a good point. You know, you brought up two different aspects of this that I kind of want to hit on, because you explained it very well, but I want to reinforce it. And one of them is the things that we know are going to cause or potentially cause heat-related illnesses. Those things like you're talking about, Barry, the tarping. You know, if it's 100 degrees out, we got to throw tarps, and, you know, we're securing a load and we're out in the sun. We know that's a part of that driver's normal job duties. So we can plan for that. We can train for that. We can discuss that prior to. But there's also then those unplanned things that a driver may find themselves in out there on the road, which you talked about as well. Those breakdowns out on the road where you're down in the Southwest and you got a tire blowout or a mechanical issue on the truck. You know, there's no cold water fountain out there. There's no umbrella, you know, to send it. There's no air conditioning, especially if it's a mechanical issue on the truck and it can't run. That potentially is a life or death situation. And it's important for companies, as Kenny said at the beginning of this, when we first started talking about assessment, I was asking you guys, we got to assess these things. And he said something I think is very key, is companies need to think outside the box when they're doing this assessment. And it's not just, our shop's hot, we need to think about heat-related illnesses in the shop. Or, you know, even though it is a real issue for our drivers when we're tarping, or if it's, you know, I know that Kenny's talked about this before with our hazmat guys, you know, if they're in attendance of a load or of a trailer being unloaded, and they're all decked out in their hazmat suit, and it's, you know, 115 degrees outside and they're just sweating bullets. Those are real issues that drivers face. but think outside the box when we're doing this assessment where our hazards are, because it could really be a life or death situation for the folks that are working for you. Because we know those areas that are the job duties, and we've mentioned those, but think about areas where the geographic locations that we're going that are going to put your drivers at risk, and come up with a plan on what to do if worst case scenario happens. What do we do? What happens if we're out in the middle of the desert and our truck breaks down? What's the protocol? What's our plan? What are we going to do now? And it shouldn't be that driver out there having to figure that out for themselves for the first time when that happens. That should be something you should be helping your driver with by prepping them ahead of time, having a plan in place, doing some training with your folks, and making sure that if the worst case scenario happens in a worst to do, there may be some things out of their control, but what is in their control is, okay, we've talked about this before. We've got a plan.
We've been talking about the desert and some of the most extreme parts of our country. And I want to highlight that the temp, it doesn't need to be that high. For heat injuries to take place, we don't need to have the worst environments. And no offense, I'm not calling our desert part of the United States the worst area in the United States. We don't have to be in where the temperatures reach that high. I mean, OSHA's proposed rule, the initial heat trigger is 80 degrees. Anybody ever thought, hey, if it just stayed 75 and sunny all year round, that'd be just the perfect weather? Well, 80 degrees is, in my mind, is pretty low, right? Well, part of this regulation, this proposed rule, is, you're using the wet bulb. And so you're going off wet bulb readings, combination of temperature and humidity. And then you have a high heat trigger. The high heat trigger under this proposed rule is 90 degrees. Well, that's every single state in the United States. Okay. So this isn't a full-blown law yet, but if we think that the temperatures have to be pretty high before we really start to consider taking this heat awareness, I mean this by no offense. Hopefully you guys take it for a little bit of comical relief that it is. But are all of our truck drivers, are all of our grain elevator and crop inputs locations, are all of those employees the pinnacle of fitness? Have they reached their top tier level of fitness in their life? Much like me, no, they're not.
Yeah, I'll throw myself in there too. Yeah.
So I bring that up to say that, Barry, I'm not a spring chicken either. And the older I get, it's funny, the older I get, the more I feel cold. And the first summer we moved here, I'm pretty sure that I had a heat-related injury. And self-diagnosed, I made it back to the house and I laid on the cool tile floors for probably an hour and a half before I could get my body to just stop radiating heat. And now it's a constant. I can feel it coming on so much quicker than it ever used to. So, this proposed rule, it talks about a buddy system. Well, in our shops and in our lots and the facilities, our physical establishments, that is a lot easier to pull off. If we've got partner rigs rolling out the door, then the buddy system or keeping an eye on your coworker is a lot more relevant and can be done. So since we've got individual truck drivers out there that may not have a buddy with them, the training and the awareness aspect for those employees is really more imperative. They're a one-person shop on assessing themselves in the situation that they're in. Do we have enough water? What is my plan? Kenny, all the way back to when you were with us and talking about job assessments, that's big in my role and what I provide for my customers. And it's not just the assignment that they have. We talked about tarping, finding that shady spot. We talked about the blowout on the side of the road. We talked about a catastrophic engine, everything breakdown, and now we're just stuck, and there's no AC. So I think this topic's pretty good for today as we're moving into the hotter part of our year. And heat is hard on equipment, and heat is hard on individuals. I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that in the wake of OSHA standing this rule up, and this podcast is not all about the heat injury and illness prevention plan proposed rule from OSHA. This is a podcast over heat safety. But I would be remiss if I did not highlight that while they were ramping this rule up before submittal, there are loads of fact sheets and there are loads of toolbox talks. There are loads of different pieces of information that you can just go on their website and take and you name it. There's so many things on the Google out there that you can take off and start implementing it at your facilities. And us here at Driving the Line, we encourage you to do so. We do our best to bring you relevant information, and we hope that you use it. And we hope that you're looking through the comment section or the resource section on all of these podcasts, because we're going to plug some of these things in there. And we want you to be discussing it with your drivers and your employees. And we want you discussing it even with your office employees, because the moment they step out of they go to work in the cool of the morning and they're sitting in the AC all day, and then they walk out at the end of the day, and it may be a long walk across the parking lot, or they go home and they think that, hey, I got a lot of gardening to do. I got to mow the yard. I got to do X, Y, Z out in the heat of the day. My kids are playing ball. I'm going to go sit at a ballpark for the rest of the day thinking, hey, I'm good to go. And they have not been hydrating at all that day because they don't feel thirsty because they're not sweating. This is a killer. It does not choose by your race or gender. This attacks all of us equally. So get those wide-brimmed hats out. Provide your employees some of those really cool-looking SPF block and long-sleeve high-vis shirts. Get them flats of water to go in their truck. And most importantly, talk to them about the season that we're going into. Talk to them about the buddy system. Highlight what those heat injuries, the beginning stages of them look like. Because your emergency action plan begins when you can identify at the earlier stage of somebody's going into some sort of heat injury or illness. So, gentlemen, without unless y'all have any additional comments, I think that's a pretty good spot to cut her loose for the day and let everybody walk in and get their first black cup of coffee. Get ready to rock and roll. For Mike, Kenny, and Barry, I'm Jim Seibert, and this is the crew from Driving the Line. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to interacting again with you on the next podcast.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.